My 6-year-old grabbed the wrong tablet for school. She took my wife's work iPad by mistake. Her teacher called. "You need to come here immediately." I rushed to her school. The police were already there. A cop took me Epsilon Omicron their room. What we found in there is horrifying. Look, when I saw what it was, I never went home again. Let me start by saying that I'm Michael Halloway, and I'm what you might call a professional know-it-all. At 39 years old, I've made a decent living as a cybersecurity consultant, which basically means I get paid to tell people why their passwords suck and why clicking on that Nigerian prince email wasn't the smartest move they've ever made. It's a good gig, honestly. I get to feel intellectually superior while wearing jeans to work and drinking overpriced coffee that tastes like it was filtered through organic disappointment. But here's the thing about being a smartass for a living. You start to believe your own hype. I mean, when you spend your days explaining to CEOs why their password 123 isn't exactly Fort Knox material, you begin to think you've got this whole life thing figured out. You start making those confident dad decisions that seem brilliant in the moment, but have all the long-term planning of a sugar-high toddler with a credit card. Which brings me to this particular Tuesday morning that would later go down in family history as the day Daddy screwed up spectacularly. It started innocently enough. Well, as innocently as anything can start when you're dealing with a 6-year-old who has the organizational skills of a caffeinated squirrel. "Daddy, I can't find my tablet," Lily announced from the kitchen, her voice carrying that special brand of 6-year-old panic that suggests the world might literally end if this problem isn't solved in the next 30 seconds. She was standing there in her little school uniform, backpack already strapped on, looking like a tiny academic ready to conquer first grade, except for the fact that she was missing her essential learning device. Now, let me paint you a picture of our morning routine. It's basically controlled chaos with a side of caffeine withdrawal. Clara, my wife, had already bolted out the door for what she claimed was an early client meeting, something about restructuring offshore assets, or some other consultant speak that made my eyes glaze over faster than a Krispy Kreme donut. She's always been the business-savvy one in our relationship, while I'm more of the turn-it-off and on-again guy. Different skill sets, you know? So there I was, solo parenting through the morning rush, which is about as graceful as a drunk flamingo trying to parallel park. Lily's tablet, the school-issued one that cost more than my first car and apparently has the durability of wet tissue paper, was nowhere to be found. We'd already torn through her room, checked under couch cushions, and even looked in the refrigerator because, hey, 6-year-olds have their own logic about where important things belong. "Sweetie, where did you last see it?" I asked, employing the classic parent interrogation technique that works about as well as asking a goldfish to remember your anniversary. "I don't know," she wailed, and I could see the waterworks starting to build up behind those big brown eyes. Nothing quite like the threat of a full-blown meltdown to get your parental problem-solving skills in a high gear. That's when my brain, in all its infinite wisdom, produced what I thought was a stroke of pure genius. Clara's work iPad was sitting right there on the kitchen counter, sleek and silver, and just begging to solve our immediate crisis. It was the same size as Lily's tablet, ran the same basic apps, and would definitely get her through the school day without any tears or tardiness. "No problem, kiddo," I said, grabbing Clara's iPad with the confidence of a man who clearly hadn't thought this through. "Here, take Mommy's tablet for today. We'll find yours when you get home." Lily's face lit up like I'd just handed her the keys to Disney World. "Really? I can use Mommy's?" "Absolutely," I said, feeling pretty damn pleased with myself. "Just be careful with it, okay? And don't download any games or mess with any of her work stuff." She nodded enthusiastically, clutching the iPad like it was made of solid gold, and just like that, crisis averted. Or so I thought. Looking back, this was probably the exact moment where the universe started laughing at me. But you know how hindsight works. It's got 20/20 vision and a really twisted sense of humor. I helped her tuck the iPad safely into her backpack, made sure she had her lunch money, and walked her out to the bus stop. She was practically bouncing with excitement, chattering about show and tell and math problems, and whether or not her friend Sophie was going to bring those awesome cookies again. Normal 6-year-old stuff that made me smile and think, yeah, I've got this dad thing down pretty well. The school bus pulled up, that big yellow symbol of temporary freedom for parents everywhere, and Lily climbed aboard with her usual enthusiasm. She waved at me through the window, backpack bouncing, that borrowed iPad safely tucked away with her textbooks and juice box. I waved back, feeling like I'd just pulled off some kind of parenting magic trick. Another successful morning, I muttered to myself, heading back inside to tackle my own day of explaining to grown adults why their cybersecurity was about as effective as a screen door on a submarine. I poured myself another cup of coffee, fired up my laptop, and dove into the thrilling world of network vulnerabilities and firewall configurations. For exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes, I was the picture of paternal competence. I handled client calls, debugged some security protocols, and even managed to schedule Lily's next dentist appointment during my lunch break. I was riding high on that particular brand of dad confidence that comes from solving problems and keeping the household running smoothly. But here's the thing about confidence. It's usually just ignorance wearing a really convincing disguise. Because while I was sitting there feeling like Father of the Year, somewhere across town, my 6-year-old daughter was about to turn my entire world upside down with nothing more than curious fingers and her mother's work tablet. And the beautiful irony? The very thing I thought made me so smart, my expertise in digital security, was about to become completely useless against the unstoppable force of childhood curiosity. If I'd known what was coming, I probably would have just let her finger paint on the walls instead. At least that kind of mess comes off with soap and water. You know that feeling when your phone rings at exactly the wrong time, and you just know, deep in your gut, that whatever's on the other end is going to royally screw up your day. That's exactly what happened at 11:03 a.m. on what had started as a perfectly normal Tuesday. I was knee-deep in a particularly riveting analysis of some company's pathetic excuse for a security system when my phone started buzzing like an angry wasp trapped in a jar. The caller ID made my stomach do that little flip-flop thing that every parent knows all too well: Willowbrook Elementary School. Now, in my experience, schools only call parents for 3 reasons. Your kid is sick, your kid got in trouble, or your kid did something so spectacularly stupid that it's going to end up as a cautionary tale in the teacher's lounge for years to come. I answered on the 3rd ring, trying to sound like a responsible adult instead of someone who'd been mentally calculating how many network breaches could fit on the head of a pin. Hello, this is Michael Halloway. Mr. Halloway? The voice on the other end belonged to Mrs. Pratt, Lily's 1st grade teacher. And let me tell you, this woman had a tone that could freeze hell over. In the 6 months since school started, I'd heard Mrs. Pratt use her indoor voice during parent-teacher conferences, her outdoor voice during field day, and her "don't make me count to 3" voice during school pickup. But this was entirely new territory. This was her "I've either discovered drugs, satanic rituals, or worse, Nickelback music on someone's device" voice. Yes, that's me, I said, already mentally preparing for whatever 1st grade catastrophe was about to unfold. Maybe Lily had accidentally deleted someone's homework. Maybe she'd figured out how to hack into the school's Wi-Fi and ordered pizza for the entire class. Kids these days are scary smart with technology. Mr. Halloway, you need to come here immediately. The words hit me like a brick to the face. Not when you get a chance, or if it's convenient. Immediately. That's parent code for you're about to regret every life decision you've ever made, starting with that time you thought reproducing was a good idea. Is Lily okay? I asked, because that's the first thing that pops into any parent's head when the school calls with that kind of urgency. Images of playground accidents and cafeteria food poisoning started dancing through my mind like sugar-high demons. She's fine, physically, Mrs. Pratt said, and I swear I could hear her choosing her words more carefully than a diplomat at a peace treaty signing. But Mr. Halloway, there's been a situation. With the tablet you sent with her today. The tablet. Clara's iPad. The brilliant solution I'd come up with during this morning's missing device crisis. Suddenly, that parental confidence I'd been riding all morning started cracking like ice on a frozen pond. What kind of situation? I asked, though part of me really didn't want to know. In my experience, when teachers use the word situation, it's never good. It's never, "Oh, there's been a situation, your child solved world hunger, and we're nominating her for a Nobel Prize." I really can't discuss this over the phone, Mrs. Pratt said, and I could practically hear her wringing her hands through the cellular connection. You need to come here. Now. And Mr. Halloway, you might want to prepare yourself. Prepare myself? What the hell was that supposed to mean? Prepare myself for what? Had Lily somehow turned Clara's iPad into a weapon of mass destruction? Had she accidentally launched nuclear missiles from the thing? I mean, I know Clara does some high-level consulting work, but surely her tablet doesn't have access to NORAD. I was already grabbing my keys and heading for the door, my mind racing through increasingly ridiculous scenarios. Maybe Lily had found Clara's shopping apps and ordered a lifetime supply of unicorn stickers. Maybe she'd discovered Clara's Spotify account and subjected the entire first grade to death metal during quiet reading time. Hell, maybe she'd found Clara's dating app from before we got married and the kids were now asking uncomfortable questions about why mommy had been messaging guys named Chest Hair Steve and Motorcycle Mike. "I'll be there in 15 minutes, I told Mrs. Pratt, already jogging toward my car like some kind of middle-aged superhero whose only power was the ability to drive slightly over the speed limit without getting a ticket. "Mr. Holloway?" Mrs. Pratt's voice stopped me just as I was about to hang up. "The police are here." The phone slipped from my hand and clattered onto the driveway. The police. The actual police. At my daughter's elementary school. Because of something on Clara's iPad. This had officially graduated from awkward parent-teacher conference to someone's probably going to jail, and it might be me. I picked up my phone, hands shaking slightly. "The police?" "Yes. Officer Doyle is waiting to speak with you. Please hurry." The line went dead, leaving me standing in my driveway like an idiot, keys in one hand, phone in the other, and a growing sense of dread in my stomach that felt like I'd swallowed a bowling ball made of pure anxiety. I drove to Willowbrook Elementary with all the calm confidence of a man heading to his own execution. Every red light felt like it lasted for 17 hours. Every stop sign might as well have been a roadblock designed specifically to torture parents who were probably about to discover their lives had imploded while they weren't paying attention. The thing that really got me was the not knowing. My brain, trained by years of troubleshooting and problem solving, was running through every possible scenario, and none of them were good. Had Clara been storing something illegal on her iPad? Was she involved in some kind of corporate espionage that I was too dense to notice? Or worse? And this thought made my skin crawl. Had she been hiding something truly awful, something that no child should ever see? As I pulled into the school parking lot, I could see them immediately. Two police cruisers parked right in front of the main entrance like they were guarding Fort Knox instead of a place where kids learn to tie their shoes and share their cookies. The sight of those black and white cars made everything real in a way that Mrs. Pratt's phone call hadn't quite managed. I sat in my car for exactly 30 seconds, gathering what was left of my courage and trying to imagine any scenario where this ended with everyone laughing about a silly misunderstanding. My imagination, apparently, was as broken as my morning confidence had been. Walking toward those front doors, past the police cars that might as well have had neon signs reading, "Your life is about to change forever," I found myself thinking about this morning's version of myself. The guy who'd handed his 6-year-old daughter a tablet without a second thought. The guy who'd felt so damn smart about solving a simple problem. That guy, I realized, was an idiot. Walking into Willowbrook Elementary felt like entering the Twilight Zone. If the Twilight Zone had motivational posters about reading and hand sanitizer dispensers every 3 feet. The usual chaos of an elementary school, kids laughing, teachers herding small humans like caffeinated sheepdogs, the distant sound of someone practicing recorder badly, had been replaced by an eerie quiet that made my skin crawl. The secretary, Mrs. Henderson, looked at me like I was carrying the plague. Usually, she'd greet me with that overly cheerful, "Good morning, Mr. Holloway," that all school staff seemed contractually obligated to use. Today, she just pointed toward the hallway with the expression of someone who'd rather be literally anywhere else on the planet, including maybe the surface of Mars. "Conference room B," she said quietly. "They're waiting for you." They, plural. As in, multiple people were gathered to discuss whatever digital disaster my daughter had unleashed upon the world. This was getting better by the minute. I walked down the hallway, passing cheerful bulletin boards covered in crayon drawings of families and pets, and couldn't help but think about how normal everything looked. Just a few hours ago, I'd walked these same halls during back-to-school night, listening to Mrs. Pratt explain the curriculum and thinking my biggest parental concern would be whether Lily was eating her vegetables at lunch. Conference room B turned out to be one of those sterile little spaces that schools use for the really serious conversations. The kind where they tell you your kid needs special help, or that they've been eating glue, or apparently, that they've somehow stumbled onto evidence of federal crimes. The room smelled like industrial disinfectant and broken dreams. Officer Ray Doyle was exactly what you'd expect from Central Casting if they were looking for generic cop number 3. Mid-40s, built like a linebacker who discovered donuts but still hit the gym twice a week, and sporting that particular brand of facial expression that cop's perfect, serious, steady, and looking like he hadn't cracked a smile since the Clinton administration. The first Clinton administration. He stood up when I entered, which somehow made everything feel more official and therefore more terrifying. Mr. Holloway? I'm Officer Doyle. Thank you for coming in. Thank you for coming in. Like I'd had a choice. Like Mrs. Pratt had called and said, hey, if you're not busy, maybe swing by so we can discuss how your family might be connected to federal crimes. Mrs. Pratt was sitting at the small conference table looking like she'd aged about 10 years since I'd seen her at the Halloween parade last month. Principal Harding, a man I'd previously only encountered during school fundraisers where he'd cheerfully shake me down for money to buy new playground equipment, was pacing back and forth like his Fitbit had personally challenged him to walk off his anxiety. But it was what was on the table that made my knees go a little wobbly. There, sitting in what was clearly an evidence bag like something out of CSI, Elementary School Edition, was Clara's iPad. The same sleek silver device I'd confidently handed to my daughter this morning was now being treated like it might explode at any second. Please, sit down, Officer Doyle said, gesturing to the chair across from him. His voice had that cop tone that wasn't quite friendly but wasn't hostile either, more like a doctor about to deliver test results that were definitely not good news. I sat down, trying to look like a responsible adult instead of someone whose stomach was currently trying to digest itself. Look, if Lily downloaded something she shouldn't have, or if she accidentally bought a bunch of apps, I can pay for whatever. Mr. Holloway, Officer Doyle interrupted, and the way he said it made me shut up immediately. This isn't about unauthorized purchases. Mrs. Pratt cleared her throat, and when she spoke, her voice sounded like she'd been gargling with gravel. Your daughter was using the tablet during our morning computer time. She was trying to find her educational apps when she discovered some files. Files? That didn't sound good. I mean, Clara's got work files on there, sure, but it's mostly boring consultant stuff, spreadsheets and PowerPoints and documents that would put a hyperactive squirrel to sleep. What kind of files could possibly warrant police involvement? What kind of files? I asked, though I was starting to get the feeling that I really didn't want to know the answer. Principal Harding stopped pacing long enough to look at me with the expression of someone who'd just witnessed a car accident involving clowns and circus animals. Mr. Holloway, did she draw on the screen with crayons? Because honestly, she's in her Picasso phase and, sir, Officer Doyle's voice cut through my rambling like a knife through warm butter. He hadn't moved, hadn't raised his voice, but something in his tone made everyone in the room go dead silent. What we found on that device is horrifying. Horrifying. That's not a word you want to hear from a police officer unless it's preceded by the criminal's fashion sense was, or followed by ly outdated. When cops use words like horrifying in relation to your family, it usually means your life is about to take a hard left turn into a brick wall. I don't understand, I said, which was the understatement of the century. It's just my wife's work tablet. She's a business consultant. The most exciting thing on there should be quarterly profit analyses and maybe some photos from her company retreat. The three adults in the room exchanged a look that made me feel like I was the only person at a party who didn't get the joke, except the joke was apparently about my life falling apart in real time. Officer Doyle reached across the table and turned the iPad toward me, the evidence bag crinkling like a candy wrapper. The screen was dark, but I could see it had been powered on recently. Whatever Lily had found was still there, waiting to be explained. Mr. Holloway, he said, his voice carrying the weight of someone about to ruin my entire day, week, and possibly year. We need to talk about what your wife does for work, and more specifically, who she does it for. The way he said it made my blood run cold. This wasn't about Lily accidentally deleting important files or somehow ordering a pony online. This was about Clara, my wife. The woman who left the house this morning talking about client meetings and restructuring offshore assets. The woman who'd been married to me for 8 years. The woman who made the best chocolate chip cookies in the neighborhood and never missed one of Lily's soccer games. What are you talking about? I asked, but even as the words left my mouth, I could feel something shifting inside my chest, like a foundation settling, but in reverse, like everything I thought I knew was starting to crack. Officer Doyle's expression didn't change, but I swear I saw something that might have been sympathy flicker across his face for just a second. Sir, we're going to need you to look at what's on this device. And then we're going to need you to tell us everything you know about your wife's business activities. Everything I knew about Clara's business activities, which, I was starting to realize with growing horror, was apparently a whole lot less than I'd thought. Officer Doyle carefully removed Clara's iPad from the evidence bag with the kind of precision usually reserved for handling radioactive materials or newborn babies. The plastic crinkled as he set it on the table between us, and I found myself staring at the device like it might suddenly sprout legs and start tap dancing. "Before we show you this," he said, his voice taking on that official cop tone that probably works great for traffic stops, but was currently making my anxiety levels spike into the stratosphere. "I need to ask you some questions. When did you last use your wife's iPad?" "I didn't," I said, which was the truth. Clara was pretty protective of her work devices, always going on about client confidentiality and secure connections. I'd figured it was typical consultant paranoia. You know, the kind of professional caution that comes from dealing with corporate secrets and non-disclosure agreements that could probably fund a small country's defense budget. "And you had no knowledge of what was stored on this device when you gave it to your daughter this morning?" "Of course not," I replied, starting to feel like I was being interrogated for a crime I didn't even know existed. "Look, I just grabbed it off the kitchen counter because Lily couldn't find her school tablet." It seemed like a simple solution to a simple problem. If I'd known there was anything. I trailed off, because honestly, I didn't even know what I was supposed to have known. Mrs. Pratt made a sound that was somewhere between a cough and a whimper. Principal Harding had stopped pacing and was now gripping the back of a chair like it was the only thing keeping him upright. These were not the reactions of people who discovered my daughter had accidentally downloaded the entire Disney Plus catalog. Officer Doyle powered on the iPad, and the familiar Apple logo appeared, followed by the lock screen. Clara's lock screen, which featured a photo of the three of us from last summer's vacation to Gulf Shores. All smiles and sunburn, looking like the poster family for middle-class suburban bliss. Looking at that photo now felt like staring at evidence from a crime scene. "Your wife's passcode?" Officer Doyle asked. Lily's birthday. 081618. I rattled off the numbers automatically, though something in the back of my mind was starting to wonder why I was helping the police unlock my wife's private device. Shouldn't there be lawyers involved? Warrants? Due process? But then again, I'd voluntarily handed the thing to my 6-year-old daughter, so maybe I'd already waived whatever privacy rights Clara might have had. The iPad unlocked, revealing Clara's typical home screen, neatly organized folders with labels like work, finance, and family photos. Everything looked normal, boringly normal, like the digital equivalent of a suburban minivan. For a split second, I thought maybe this was all some kind of massive misunderstanding. Then Officer Doyle opened a folder I'd never seen before. DH Projects. At first, I thought maybe it stood for something innocent. Dinner hacks. Maybe, knowing Clara's obsession with finding new recipes. Or dog hair solutions, since our golden retriever, Buster, shed enough fur daily to supply a small textile factory. Hell, maybe it was dental hygiene tips, because Clara was always on my case about flossing. I was so wrong it wasn't even funny. Officer Doyle tapped the folder, and my world imploded. The first thing I saw was a spreadsheet. Nothing unusual there. Clara loved her spreadsheets the way some people love oxygen. But as my eyes focused on the column headers, my brain started doing that thing where it refuses to process what it's seeing. Like when you walk into the wrong classroom and spend 30 seconds wondering why everyone looks so unfamiliar. Route schedules. I read aloud, my voice sounding weird and distant. Container numbers. Port manifests. I looked up at Officer Doyle. "What is this?" Instead of answering, he swiped to the next file. Photos. Lots of them. And that's when I realized that my wife, the woman who made pancakes every Sunday morning and cried during Hallmark movies, had been living a double life that made my worst nightmare look like a pleasant daydream. The photos showed shipping containers, the big metal boxes you see stacked on cargo ships like industrial Legos. Nothing inherently sinister about that, except these containers had people in them. Real people. People who looked scared, tired, and like they hadn't chosen to be photographed while crammed into a metal box. Jesus Christ, I whispered, and immediately felt bad for swearing in an elementary school. But honestly, this seemed like a situation where normal social conventions had gone out the window. Officer Doyle swiped again. More photos. These showed what looked like a warehouse, with rows of mattresses on the floor and chains, actual chains, attached to the walls. It looked like something out of a horror movie, except horror movies have the courtesy to end after 2 hours and let you go home to your safe, normal life. This can't be real, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew they were. The timestamps on the photos were recent, within the last few months. And there, in several of the images, was my wife. Not Clara making dinner Clara, or Clara helping with homework Clara. This was someone else entirely. Someone wearing expensive clothes and holding what looked like official documents. Someone who looked comfortable in these horrific places. Someone who looked like she belonged there. In one photo, she was standing next to a man in a suit, both of them smiling like they'd just closed a business deal. Which, I was starting to realize with growing horror, they probably had. Behind them, barely visible in the background, were the shadowy figures of what could only be described as human cargo. That's Derek Holt, Officer Doyle said, pointing to the man in the suit. He runs one of the largest human trafficking operations on the East Coast. And that, he pointed to my wife, is your wife Clara, who, according to our investigation, has been his business partner for the past 2 years. Business partner. The words hit me like a physical blow. All those late nights she'd claimed were client meetings. All those business trips to cities I'd never heard of. All those times she'd come home with expensive gifts and explanations about bonuses and successful contract negotiations. I think I'm going to be sick, I muttered, and Mrs. Pratt quickly pushed a trash can in my direction, which was probably the most useful thing anyone had done all day. Officer Doyle kept scrolling. Financial records showing wire transfers in amounts that made my cybersecurity consultant salary look like lunch money. Offshore account information. Contact lists with names I didn't recognize and phone numbers from countries I couldn't even pronounce. And through it all, Clara's digital fingerprints were everywhere. Her email address, her phone number, her digital signature on documents that made my skin crawl just looking at them. My only thought. I finally managed to croak out. So that's how we could afford her new BMW. The police station smelled like burnt coffee, industrial disinfectant, and the collective despair of people having the worst day of their lives. I'd been escorted here in the back of Officer Doyle's cruiser, which was about as comfortable as sitting in a metal lunchbox while contemplating how spectacularly your life had just imploded. The whole ride over, I kept thinking this had to be some kind of elaborate prank, like maybe I'd accidentally stumbled onto the set of some low-budget crime drama, and everyone had just forgotten to tell me I was the comic relief. But the interrogation room was real enough. Gray walls, fluorescent lighting that made everyone look like they had some kind of wasting disease, and a metal table that had probably witnessed more confessions than a Catholic church during Lent. Detective Luis Mendoza sat across from me, a guy who looked like he'd stepped straight out of a police procedural, mid-40s, slightly rumpled suit, and the kind of mustache that screamed, "I've seen some shit, and I'm not impressed by your suburban dad problems." For 3 hours straight, this guy grilled me like I was a suspect in the Kennedy assassination. And let me tell you, being interrogated is nothing like what you see on TV. There's no dramatic music, no perfectly timed revelations, and definitely no commercial breaks when things get too intense. It's just you, a cop who's heard every lie ever invented, and the slow, dawning realization that your life as you knew it is officially over. Let's start from the beginning, Detective Mendoza said, opening a file folder thick enough to choke a horse. How long have you been married to Clara Holloway? 8 years, I answered, which felt weird because suddenly even the most basic facts about my life seemed suspect. Had we really been married 8 years? Or had the whole thing been some elaborate cover story while my wife built her criminal empire? And in those 8 years, you never suspected anything unusual about her work. I almost laughed. Detective, my wife could balance a checkbook, fix a running toilet, and negotiate contracts that made my head spin. The only thing I ever suspected was that she was way too good for me, which, ironically, turns out to be true in the worst possible way. He didn't crack a smile. Tough crowd. The questions kept coming, each one designed to poke holes in my story or reveal some hidden knowledge I supposedly had. It was like being on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, except instead of winning money, I was trying to avoid winning a prison sentence, and instead of asking the audience, I was mostly just asking myself how the hell I'd ended up in this situation. Did you ever question her business trips? Only when she said she was going to Miami during a blizzard, I admitted. But she explained it as a last-minute client emergency. I figured consultants had weird schedules. These client emergencies, Detective Mendoza said, flipping through his notes like he was reading a grocery list instead of the details of my collapsing marriage. How often did they occur? Maybe once a month? Sometimes more. As I said it, I realized how naive that sounded. Once a month, my wife disappeared for days at a time, and I'd just accepted it as normal business travel. I'd been about as observant as a goldfish with amnesia. And you never asked to meet any of these clients? She said it was confidential. Non-disclosure agreements, and all that corporate stuff. I was starting to feel like the world's most clueless husband. Look, Detective, Clara handled all the business side of our life. I fixed computers and tried not to screw up dinner too badly. We had a system that apparently included your wife running a multi-million-dollar human trafficking operation. The words hung in the air like a bad smell. Multi-million-dollar. Human trafficking. My wife, who clipped coupons and got excited about sales at Target, had apparently been making the kind of money that drug cartels would envy. Did you know Derek Holt? Detective Mendoza asked, sliding a photograph across the table. It was the same guy I'd seen in the photos with Clara, suit, confident smile, and the kind of face that looked like it had never met a moral boundary it couldn't cross. Never seen him before in my life. What about offshore accounts? Swiss bank accounts? Cryptocurrency wallets? Detective, I barely understand my regular checking account. You're asking me about financial stuff that's way above my pay grade. He leaned back in his chair, studying me like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve. Mr. Holloway, your wife was pulling down serious money. We're talking millions. And you're telling me you never wondered where it all came from. That's when it hit me. Wait, millions? What millions? We live in a 3-bedroom house in suburbia. We drive practical cars. We shop at Costco, for crying out loud. If Clara was making millions, where the hell was it going? Detective Mendoza's expression shifted slightly, like maybe he was starting to believe that I really was as clueless as I claimed. That's what we're trying to figure out. For the next hour, we went through our finances with the thoroughness of an IRS audit on steroids. Our joint accounts, which showed the perfectly mundane financial life of a middle-class family. Clara's personal account, which had regular deposits that matched her claimed consulting fees. The mortgage payments, car payments, grocery bills, and school expenses that made up our boring suburban existence. Either your wife is a financial genius who could make dirty money disappear better than Houdini, Detective Mendoza finally said, or you really don't know anything about her other life. I'm going with door number 2, I said. Because honestly, if Clara was that good at hiding money, she wouldn't have made me clip coupons for the past 8 years. More questions, more files, more photos that made me question everything I thought I knew about the woman I'd shared a bed with for nearly a decade. They showed me shipping manifests with Clara's signature, financial records with her name, even surveillance photos of her meeting with people who looked like they'd stepped out of a mafia movie. Finally, after what felt like 17 hours but was probably closer to 3, Detective Mendoza closed his file folder and leaned back in his chair. Mr. Holloway, I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've gotten pretty good at spotting liars. Either you're the best actor I've ever met, or you really are just an unlucky guy who married the wrong woman. I'm going with unlucky, I said, because my acting skills peaked in the 3rd-grade Christmas pageant, and even then I forgot half my lines. He stood up, and for the first time all day, something that might have been sympathy flickered across his face. You're free to go, but Mr. Holloway, don't leave town. This investigation is just getting started, and we're going to need you available. As I walked out of that interrogation room, I realized they'd cleared me of being a criminal mastermind, which would have been more reassuring if it hadn't come with the revelation that my wife definitely was one. Apparently, I wasn't criminal mastermind material. Shocking, I know. After being released from the police station with all the fanfare of a deflated birthday balloon, I found myself standing in my own driveway, staring at my house like it belonged to someone else. Everything looked exactly the same. Same beige siding, same slightly crooked mailbox that I'd been meaning to fix for 2 years, Same garden gnome that Lily had insisted we needed because it looked lonely at the store. But somehow, knowing what I now knew about Clara, it all felt different. Like I was looking at a movie set instead of my actual life. The FBI had given me back Clara's purse, apparently, after photographing every single item in it, cataloging the contents, and probably running each receipt through some kind of criminal database. Going through her stuff felt like archaeological excavation, except instead of uncovering ancient civilizations, I was uncovering evidence that my wife was apparently a sociopathic entrepreneur with a side hustle and human misery. Most of it was normal wife stuff. Lip balm that cost more than my lunch, approximately 47 hair ties, a receipt from Target that was long enough to use as wallpaper, and enough mints to supply a small restaurant. But tucked in the little zippered compartment that I'd always assumed held emergency tampons or spare change, I found something that made my blood run cold. A small silver key. Not a house key or a car key or even one of those gym locker keys that normal people carry around. This was different. It had a number etched into it, 247, and the logo of Stormore Self-Storage, a place I'd driven past a million times but never thought about twice. Because who needs a storage unit when you live in a house with a perfectly good basement and a garage that's only half full of Christmas decorations and exercise equipment I'd bought with good intentions but never used? Standing there in my kitchen, holding that tiny piece of metal, I felt like I was in one of those horror movies where the protagonist finds a mysterious key and has two choices: ignore it and go on living in blissful ignorance, or follow it down the rabbit hole and discover that everything they thought they knew was a lie. Since my blissful ignorance had already been thoroughly destroyed by my 6-year-old daughter and an iPad, I figured I might as well see what other fun surprises Clara had left for me to discover. The drive to Stormore Self-Storage took about 15 minutes, during which I practiced various explanations for why I was there. Hi, I'm looking for my wife's storage unit because I just found out she's been running a human trafficking operation. Seemed a bit too honest. I need to check on our stored belongings sounded more reasonable, even though the only things I'd ever stored anywhere were my collection of concert t-shirts from the 90s and a box of Lily's baby clothes that Clara insisted we'd need just in case. The storage facility looked exactly like every other storage facility in America. Rows of identical orange doors that stretched out like some kind of suburban prison compound. The guy at the front office looked like he'd rather be literally anywhere else, which I could relate to, honestly. His name tag said Brad, and Brad clearly hadn't signed up for whatever drama I was about to bring to his Tuesday afternoon. I need to access Unit 247, I said, holding up the key like it was some kind of magical artifact. Instead of a piece of metal that was about to ruin what was left of my day, Brad barely looked up from whatever game he was playing on his phone. Name: Halloway. Michael Halloway. I waited for him to check some kind of list or ask for ID, but apparently Stormore Self-Storage wasn't exactly Fort Knox when it came to security protocols. Yeah, okay, whatever. Building C, third row down. Try not to make a mess. The walk to Building C felt like the longest walk of my life, which was saying something considering I'd already had what qualified as the worst day in recorded history. Each step felt like I was walking toward my own execution. If executions involved discovering what your spouse had been hiding in a 10 by 10 metal box instead of, actual death. Unit 247 was tucked between a storage space that smelled like mothballs and old furniture, and another one that was making suspicious rattling noises every time the wind blew. I slid the key into the lock, and it turned with the kind of smooth click that suggested it had been used recently. Very recently. I grabbed the handle and rolled up the metal door, half expecting to find more Christmas decorations or maybe some old tax records. Instead, I found myself staring into what could only be described as a Bond villain's office space, if Bond villains shopped at Office Depot and had a subscription to Psychopath Monthly. The storage unit was organized with the kind of precision that would make Marie Kondo weep with joy. Except instead of sparking joy, everything in here sparked pure, unadulterated terror. Metal filing cabinets lined one wall, each drawer labeled with codes that meant nothing to me, but probably represented nightmares for other people. A folding table held stacks of manila folders, each one thick enough to be a novel, and none of them looking like they contained anything I wanted to read during my lunch break. But it was the walls that really got to me. They were covered, and I mean completely covered, with photographs, maps, charts, and what looked like organizational charts for the world's most horrific corporation. Photos of shipping containers, warehouses, and people who looked like they'd never consented to being photographed. Maps with routes marked in red ink that crossed international borders. And charts that tracked things I didn't want to think about too hard, with numbers that represented human lives reduced to inventory. Holy shit, I muttered, then immediately felt guilty for swearing, even though there was nobody around to hear me except possibly the ghosts of my former ignorance. I walked deeper into the unit, feeling like I was touring a museum dedicated to everything wrong with humanity. One filing cabinet was labeled routes and schedules. Another said financial records. A third, which made my stomach turn just reading it, was labeled inventory management. I opened the first drawer of the financial records cabinet, and my brain nearly short-circuited. Bank statements showing deposits that made my annual salary look like pocket change. Wire transfer records to and from countries I couldn't even find on a map. Investment portfolios that would make Wall Street executives jealous, except these investments were apparently in human suffering. And there, in a folder marked personal, were photos of Clara at what looked like business meetings, except these business meetings were taking place in warehouses and shipping yards, and the people in the photos with her looked like they could make people disappear without breaking a sweat. And I thought my biggest secret was eating Lily's Halloween candy. I said to the empty storage unit, my voice echoing off the metal walls. But Clara? Clara had built herself a whole empire of secrets that made my candy theft look like sainthood. 3 days. That's how long Clara had been radio silent after the whole "your daughter found evidence of human trafficking on mommy's iPad" incident. 3 days of me wandering around our house like a ghost, jumping every time the phone rang, and explaining to a very confused 6-year-old why mommy was away on a very important business trip and why there were FBI agents occasionally driving by our house like the world's most obvious surveillance team. I'd been living off pizza delivery and the kind of gas station coffee that tastes like it was brewed with motor oil, trying to figure out what the hell you're supposed to do when you discover your wife is essentially a suburban soccer mom version of a crime boss. Do you call her? Do you wait for her to call you? Do you change the locks and pretend the last 8 years never happened? The Emily Post etiquette guide definitely doesn't have a chapter on when your spouse turns out to be a human trafficker. Then, at exactly 6:47 p.m. on Thursday, my phone buzzed with a text from Clara's number. My heart did that weird thing where it simultaneously jumped into my throat and dropped into my stomach, like it couldn't decide whether to be relieved or terrified. Meet me at Reunion Tower tonight. 8 p.m. Alone. That was it. No. Hey honey, sorry I've been running a criminal enterprise behind your back. No. We need to talk about our relationship status now that I'm probably going to federal prison. Just coordinates for a meetup, like we were conducting some kind of spy exchange, instead of having what would probably be the most awkward marital conversation in recorded history. Reunion Tower. Of course, she'd picked Dallas's most iconic landmark for our Come to Jesus meeting. Nothing says, I'm about to confess to crimes against humanity, like meeting 470 feet above the city in a slowly rotating restaurant that charges $40 for a burger. It was either romantic in the most twisted way possible, or Clara had developed a flair for the dramatic that would make soap opera writers jealous. I almost didn't go. For about 20 minutes, I sat in my car in the parking garage, gripping the steering wheel and seriously considering just driving home, packing up Lily, and disappearing somewhere Clara would never find us. Maybe Montana. I heard Montana was nice, and they probably had a shortage of people whose wives had secret careers in international crime. But curiosity killed the cat, and apparently it was about to kill whatever was left of my sanity, too. The elevator ride to the top felt longer than my 3-hour police interrogation. When the doors finally opened, I stepped into the restaurant and immediately spotted Clara at a table by the window, silhouetted against the Dallas skyline like some kind of beautiful, terrifying angel of doom. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her makeup was either smudged or completely absent, and she was wearing a plain black sweater that looked like she'd grabbed it off the clearance rack instead of her usual designer wardrobe. She looked up when I approached, and for a split second, I saw the woman I'd married. Vulnerable, scared, maybe even a little hopeful. Then reality crashed back in, and I remembered that this was the same woman who had apparently been coordinating the movement of human beings like they were packages on a delivery truck. "Hi, Michael," she said quietly, like we'd bumped into each other at the grocery store instead of meeting for the first time since I discovered she was basically a real-life Bond villain. "Clara." I sat down across from her, noting that she'd already ordered wine. Red wine. Expensive red wine, based on the bottle, which seemed a little tone-deaf considering the circumstances. "Nice to see you finally surfaced. The FBI was starting to think you'd fled to a non-extradition country." She flinched like I'd slapped her, which was probably fair since my tone could have cut glass. "I deserve that." "You deserve a lot of things," I said, "and most of them involve federal prison and a lifetime supply of regret." The waiter appeared, some young guy who looked like he'd rather be serving tables literally anywhere else on the planet, and asked if I wanted to order anything. I asked for whiskey, a double, because if I was going to have a conversation with my criminal wife while slowly rotating above the city where we'd built our fake life together, I was definitely going to need alcohol. "You look terrible," I said, which wasn't entirely true. Even exhausted and guilt-ridden, Clara still looked better than most people on their best day. It was annoying. "I feel terrible," she replied, tracing the rim of her wine glass with her finger. "Michael, I never meant for any of this to happen." "Which part? The human trafficking or getting caught?" She winced again. "Any of it. All of it. I never meant for you and Lily to get involved." "Well, congratulations," I said, raising my whiskey glass in a mock toast. "Mission accomplished. Our 6-year-old is now part of a federal investigation. I've been interrogated by the FBI, and I discovered that my wife has been living a double life that makes Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde look like amateur hour." That's when Clara started crying. Not the pretty, delicate tears you see in movies, but the ugly, soul-crushing kind of sobs that come from somewhere deep inside when you realize you've completely destroyed everything good in your life. For a moment, just a moment, I felt sorry for her. Then I remembered the photos of terrified people in shipping containers, and that moment passed pretty quickly. "Tell me why," I said, leaning forward. "Tell me how Clara Holloway, the woman who cries during dog food commercials and volunteers at the school book fair, ended up running a human trafficking operation." She took a shaky breath and started talking. And for the next hour, as Dallas slowly rotated beneath us, my wife confessed everything. How it had started small, just helping a friend move some money around, no questions asked. How the money had been too good to pass up. How she'd told herself she was just handling the financial side, not the actual people. How she'd convinced herself that she could outsmart everyone. The FBI, Derek Holt, even me. "I did it for us," she said finally, looking at me with eyes that were red-rimmed and desperate. "For our future. For Lily's college fund. For the life we wanted." I laughed. I actually laughed, right there in that expensive restaurant. So hard that the tourist couple at the next table started staring at us like I was having some kind of breakdown. Which, honestly, I probably was. "No, Clara," I said, still chuckling with the kind of hysteria that comes from discovering your entire life has been a lie. "You did it for the money. We did not need a blood money-funded BMW." After Clara's tearful confession at Reunion Tower, which had all the emotional impact of a Hallmark movie written by someone with severe trust issues, I figured our conversation was over. She'd cried, I'd been appropriately sarcastic, and we'd both acknowledged that our marriage was deader than disco and twice as embarrassing. I was ready to go home, hug my daughter, and start figuring out how to explain to a 6-year-old that mommy wouldn't be coming home for Christmas, or potentially any other holiday for the foreseeable future. But then Clara dropped another bomb that made everything else look like a friendly water balloon fight. "There's something else," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin that probably cost more than most people's lunch. "Someone above Derek. Someone who's been calling the shots this whole time." I set down my whiskey glass, which I'd been holding like a security blanket for the past hour. "Above Derek? What do you mean, above Derek?" "Derek wasn't the boss, Michael. He was middle management. There's someone else, someone who's been coordinating everything from the beginning. They call him the director." The director? Because apparently, Clara's criminal organization had all the creativity of a corporate hierarchy and the moral compass of a hungry shark. "Let me guess," I said. "This director person is the one who's going to have us all killed if you don't deliver whatever it is you're supposed to deliver." Clara's face went white, which was answer enough. He doesn't know that you know about any of this. But Michael, if he finds out that the FBI has been investigating, he'll assume I talked. And he'll come after all of us. All of us meaning you, me, Lily. She said our daughter's name like it physically hurt, which it probably should have, considering she'd put our kid in danger by playing criminal mastermind in her spare time. I stared at her across the table, trying to process the fact that this nightmare somehow had another level to it. It was like discovering that your house was haunted, then finding out the ghost had a whole extended family of other ghosts who were also pissed off and possibly armed. So what are you suggesting? I asked. That we pack up and move to witness protection? Change our names, and spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders because you decided to diversify into human trafficking? I'm suggesting, Clara said, leaning forward with the kind of intensity that would have been attractive if she wasn't discussing federal crimes, that we help the FBI catch him. And that's how I found myself, 3 days later, standing in the Dallas Arboretum at 7 in the morning, surrounded by enough hidden FBI agents to staff a small military operation, watching my wife get fitted with a wire that was apparently more sophisticated than most people's home entertainment systems. Agent Sarah Martinez, who looked like she could bench press a car, and probably had, was explaining the plan to me like I was a particularly slow student in FBI 101. Mrs. Holloway will meet with Lewis Chapman, that's the director's real name, at the plan location. She'll get him talking about the operation, hopefully get him to admit to specific crimes on tape, and then we'll move in. And if something goes wrong? I asked, because I'd seen enough movies to know that these things never went according to plan. Nothing's going to go wrong, Agent Martinez said with the kind of confidence that people have right before everything goes spectacularly wrong. We'll have eyes on her the entire time. She'll be completely safe. I looked over at Clara, who was standing about 20 feet away getting instructions from another agent on how to activate the recording device without looking like she was operating spy equipment. She caught my eye and gave me a weak smile that was probably supposed to be reassuring, but mostly just made me think about how this might be the last time I ever saw her outside of a federal courthouse. Why are you doing this? I asked her when the agents stepped away for a minute. You could probably cut a deal, cooperate from prison, keep yourself safe. Why risk meeting with this guy face to face? She looked at me like I was asking why she breathed oxygen instead of carbon monoxide. Because he threatened our daughter, Michael. He knows where we live, where she goes to school, what her favorite color is. I got us into this mess, and I'm going to get us out of it. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. at the Arboretum's main pavilion, which struck me as either the most civilized location for a criminal confrontation in history, or the most twisted. Nothing says, let's discuss human trafficking, like a backdrop of beautiful flowers and families having pleasant morning walks. Lewis Chapman showed up right on time, which was either professionalism or the kind of punctuality that comes from being a sociopath with excellent time management skills. From my position behind a strategically placed oak tree. And yeah, I was hiding behind a tree like some kind of suburban spy, because apparently this was my life now. I watched him approach Clara with the casual confidence of someone who'd never doubted his own invincibility. He looked disappointingly normal. Mid-50s, gray hair, expensive suit that probably cost more than my car. He could have been any business executive meeting a client for coffee, except most business executives don't coordinate international crime syndicates in their spare time. He looked more like an accountant than a kingpin, but he talked like Darth Vader with a law degree and a subscription to Evil Weekly. Clara, he said, and even from 50 yards away, I could hear the kind of fake warmth that politicians use when they're about to screw you over. You've been difficult to reach lately. Through the earpiece Agent Martinez had given me, because apparently I was now part of this operation whether I wanted to be or not. I could hear Clara's response, her voice steady despite the fact that she was probably terrified. I've been laying low. The heat's been intense. Yes, I heard about the unfortunate incident with your daughter's school tablet. Chapman's voice carried the kind of casual menace that made my skin crawl. Children can be so unpredictable. That's when I knew this guy was going down. You can threaten me. You can threaten my wife. You can probably threaten my dog, and I'll just get slightly annoyed. But you threaten my kid? You just made this personal in a way that transcends whatever legal justice the FBI might have planned. For the next 20 minutes, Chapman laid out his entire operation like he was giving a PowerPoint presentation to potential investors. Routes, schedules, profit margins, and expansion plans that made my stomach turn. He talked about human beings like they were inventory, discussed international laws like they were minor inconveniences, and mentioned specific crimes that would probably keep federal prosecutors busy for the next decade. And through it all, Clara's wire was recording every single word. Then boom. FBI agents swarmed the pavilion like ants on spilled cotton candy. Chapman was surrounded, handcuffed, and reading his rights before he could even process what was happening. His last words before being shoved into a federal vehicle were something about lawyers and constitutional rights, which seemed a little hypocritical coming from someone who'd been treating the Constitution like a suggestion rather than the law of the land. Clara stared at me across the pavilion like I'd just pulled off the most impressive magic trick in recorded history. Sorry, sweetheart. I wasn't John Wick. I was just a dad who got really, really mad when someone threatened his kid. Fast forward 6 months, and I found myself sitting in a federal courthouse that looked like it had been designed by someone who thought intimidating and soul-crushing were desirable architectural features. The place smelled like furniture polish, fear, and the collective anxiety of people who'd made really bad life decisions. I was wearing the only suit I owned, the same one I'd bought for our wedding 8 years ago, which now felt like it belonged to a completely different person who lived in a completely different universe where wives didn't secretly run human trafficking operations. Clara sat at the defendant's table wearing an orange jumpsuit that was definitely not from her usual designer wardrobe. Orange, as it turned out, was not her color, though I suppose when you're facing federal charges for crimes against humanity, fashion choices become somewhat irrelevant. She looked smaller somehow, diminished in a way that had nothing to do with the unflattering prison attire and everything to do with the weight of what she'd done finally settling on her shoulders. The courtroom was packed with people whose lives Clara had touched in various ways, none of them good. FBI agents, prosecutors, reporters who looked like they'd rather be covering literally any other story, and most heartbreakingly, some of the victims whose testimonies would determine my wife's fate. Looking at these people, real people whose lives had been shattered by Clara's business decisions, made everything feel real in a way that even finding that storage unit full of evidence hadn't quite managed. Judge Patricia Hendricks looked like the kind of woman who'd probably been taking no bullshit since approximately 1987, and she clearly wasn't planning to start today. She had that particular brand of judicial authority that could make hardened criminals reconsider their life choices with nothing more than a raised eyebrow. The court will now hear victim impact statements, Judge Hendricks announced, and I braced myself for what I knew was going to be the worst part of this entire nightmare. The first victim to speak was a young woman named Maria Santos. She couldn't have been more than 25, with dark hair and eyes that held the kind of pain that doesn't fade with time. When she stood up to address the court, her voice was steady but quiet, like someone who'd learned to speak carefully because words had consequences. "Your Honor," Maria said, looking directly at Clara. "The defendant coordinated my transport from Honduras to Texas. I was promised work as a nanny. Instead, I was locked in a warehouse for 8 months and forced to work for men who paid her organization. I felt sick. This wasn't some abstract criminal case anymore. This was a real person describing real trauma that my wife had caused." Clara, to her credit, was crying. But honestly, that seemed like too little too late. Maria continued, "But I want the court to know something else. The files that the defendant kept, the detailed records that the FBI recovered from her storage unit, those files helped identify other victims. They helped locate other warehouses. Her obsession with documentation, which was part of her crime, also became part of our rescue." She turned to look at Clara directly. "She hurt me, but her files also saved me and dozens of other women like me." Jesus. Even Clara's crimes had been methodically organized. She'd been such a perfectionist that she'd accidentally created the evidence that would help her victims while simultaneously destroying her own life. It was like she'd committed crimes with the same attention to detail that she'd brought to organizing our kitchen pantry. 3 more victims testified, each one telling a story that made me want to crawl under a rock and never come out. They talked about being promised legitimate work, about being transported in conditions that weren't fit for animals, about being trapped in situations where Clara's organization had held their lives in balance. And through it all, Clara sobbed like someone whose soul was being pulled out through her nose. When it was Clara's turn to speak, she stood up slowly, like her legs weren't quite sure they wanted to support her anymore. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but in the dead silence of the courtroom, every word carried. Your Honor, I have no excuse for what I've done. I told myself I was just handling money, just managing logistics. I told myself I wasn't directly hurting anyone. She paused, wiping her eyes with a tissue that was probably the most expensive thing she'd touched in months. But I was lying to myself, the same way I lied to my husband and my daughter. She looked over at me then, and I saw something in her eyes that might have been genuine remorse, or might have been just the desperation of someone finally facing consequences for their actions. I was weak. I was selfish. I was addicted to the money, to the power, to feeling like I was smarter than everyone around me. Her voice got stronger as she continued, like confessing was giving her some kind of twisted energy. I convinced myself that I could control everything, that I could outsmart the FBI, that I could keep my family safe while participating in something that destroyed other families. She turned to face the victims who were sitting in the gallery. I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. I know sorry doesn't give you back the months or years that were taken from you. But I want you to know that I will spend every day for the rest of my life trying to make up for what I've done. Judge Hendricks listened to all of this with the expression of someone who'd heard every excuse, every sob story, and every promise of redemption that the human imagination could produce. When Clara finished speaking, the judge took off her glasses, cleaned them slowly, and put them back on like she was preparing to deliver news that nobody particularly wanted to hear. Mrs. Holloway, she said, you participated in an operation that treated human beings as merchandise. You coordinated logistics that kept victims trapped in conditions of forced labor. You profited from human suffering while maintaining the facade of a suburban mother and wife. Clara nodded, accepting each word like physical blows. However, Judge Hendricks continued, your cooperation with federal authorities led to the arrest and conviction of Lewis Chapman and the disruption of an international trafficking network. Your detailed records helped law enforcement locate and rescue dozens of victims. She paused, and the entire courtroom held its breath. I hereby sentence you to 12 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole in 6 years, contingent upon your continued cooperation with ongoing investigations. 12 years. Lily would be 18 when Clara got out, assuming she got out early for good behavior. Our daughter would graduate from high school, maybe go to college, become an adult, all while her mother served time for crimes that sounded like something from a really depressing Netflix series. I sat there thinking about how I'd once argued with this woman about which Netflix subscription plan to get, and meanwhile, she'd been laundering millions of dollars through offshore accounts and coordinating international criminal operations. The marriage? Over. The justice? Served, though it tasted about as satisfying as lukewarm coffee. The irony? Absolutely delicious. 2 years later, I'm living in Austin with Lily, and let me tell you, starting over at 41 is about as much fun as root canal surgery performed by a caffeinated squirrel. Our new house is smaller, a lot smaller, than our old suburban palace in Dallas, but it's got something our old place never had: the complete absence of federal crime scene tape and neighbors who whisper about us behind strategically placed garden sheds. The house itself is nothing to write home about, assuming you had a home to write to, which I don't, since my last home turned out to be built on a foundation of human trafficking, money, and lies. It's a 3-bedroom ranch style in a neighborhood where people actually talk to each other instead of just nodding politely while secretly wondering if you're going to be featured on the evening news for all the wrong reasons. The front yard is big enough for Lily to practice soccer. The backyard has a tree that's perfect for the tire swing I finally got around to installing. And most importantly, none of it was purchased with blood money. Bigger piece, smaller house. It's like some kind of twisted real estate philosophy that nobody teaches you in home economics class. I'm consulting for the FBI now, which has to be the weirdest career pivot in recorded history. Turns out that when your wife moonlights as a criminal mastermind, you develop a very specific skill set that federal law enforcement finds surprisingly useful. Who knew that years of debugging network security systems would translate so perfectly to helping track down digital evidence of international crimes? It's like my entire professional life had been preparing me for this moment, except instead of getting a gold watch for 25 years of service, I got a front row seat to my marriage exploding in spectacular fashion. The work is actually pretty satisfying, in a twisted way. I spend my days hunting down the digital breadcrumbs that criminals leave behind. Offshore account transfers, encrypted communications, and digital records that people think they've deleted but haven't really deleted because, surprise, the internet is forever and criminals are usually about as tech-savvy as my grandmother trying to use Netflix. Every piece of evidence I help uncover means another victim might be found, another trafficking ring might be shut down, another family might be reunited. It's like being a superhero, except instead of wearing a cape, I wear khakis and drink too much coffee while staring at computer screens. The FBI agents I work with treat me like some kind of unicorn. The guy whose personal life imploded so spectacularly that he accidentally became an expert in criminal digital forensics. Agent Martinez, who's still somehow convinced that nothing ever goes wrong with federal operations despite all evidence to the contrary, introduced me to the team as the consultant whose wife tried to outsmart us all and accidentally made him really good at this job. It's not exactly the professional reputation I planned on building. But hey, life rarely goes according to plan, especially when your spouse has been secretly coordinating international crimes during her business trips. Lily, meanwhile, has adapted to our new life with the kind of resilience that 8-year-olds seem to specialize in. She's thriving, straight A's in her new school, star player on her soccer team, and she's developed a sense of humor that's definitely inherited from me, though hers is somehow both more sophisticated and more devastating than mine. Kids are terrifying like that. Her new school, Riverside Elementary, is the kind of place where teachers actually know their students' names instead of just referring to them as the kid whose mom got arrested by the FBI. The principal, Mrs. Rodriguez, is one of those educators who seems to genuinely love her job instead of just tolerating it until retirement, and Lily's teacher, Mr. Patterson, has the patience of a saint and the energy of someone who drinks entirely too much caffeine but channels it into making learning fun. Sometimes Lily asks about Clara, not often, but when she does, her questions are the kind that make me realize 8-year-olds are way smarter than adults give them credit for. She doesn't ask, "When is mommy coming home?" anymore, which honestly breaks my heart a little bit. Now she asks things like, "Is mommy helping other people who got hurt? And do you think she's sorry about the bad things she did?" I tell her the truth, which is something I probably should have been doing all along. Clara is in federal prison, serving time for crimes that hurt a lot of people. She's working with the FBI now, helping them understand how the criminal organization worked, helping them find other victims who need rescue, helping them prevent other people from getting hurt the way she helped hurt them. It's not exactly redemption, but it's something that resembles taking responsibility, which is more than a lot of people in her situation manage to do. So she's finally doing her homework. Lily asked me last week, and I nearly choked on my coffee because somehow my 8-year-old daughter had just summarized the entire situation better than any FBI briefing I'd ever attended. "Yeah, kiddo," I said, laughing despite everything. She's finally doing her homework. And me? I've learned that sometimes the biggest betrayals start with the smallest mistakes, like handing your kid the wrong tablet. It's funny how life works sometimes. One moment you're a suburban dad whose biggest concern is whether the dishwasher needs to be repaired, and the next moment you're rebuilding your entire existence while helping federal agents track down international criminals. One moment you think you know everything about the person you're married to, and the next moment you realize you didn't even know the person you were sleeping next to for 8 years. But here's the weird thing. I'm happier now than I've been in years. Not because Clara's gone. I'm not that much of a sociopath. But because everything in my life now is real. No more wondering why Clara seemed stressed all the time. No more feeling like I was missing some crucial piece of information about our finances. No more living in a house that was maintained with money that came from destroying other people's lives. Lily and I eat breakfast together every morning, and she tells me about her dreams and her friends and her plans to become either a veterinarian or a professional soccer player, depending on which one seems more fun when she grows up. We watch movies together on Friday nights, her choice, which means I've seen every animated film produced in the last 3 years at least 17 times, and we talk about everything and nothing in the way that only parents and kids can do. On weekends, we explore Austin like tourists in our own city. We've been to the state capitol, the Bullock, Texas State History Museum, and approximately every playground in a 15-mile radius. Lily's favorite spot is Zilker Park, where she can run around like the slightly feral 8-year-old she is while I sit on a bench and marvel at how much simpler life is when nobody in your immediate family is coordinating international crimes. Sometimes I think about Clara, wondering what she's doing in her federal facility, wondering if she thinks about us, wondering if she's genuinely sorry or just sorry she got caught. But mostly, I don't. Mostly, I focus on the life I'm building with Lily, the work I'm doing to help people, and the simple pleasure of living honestly for the first time in years. The other day, Lily asked me if I missed being married. I thought about it for a long time before answering. I miss being married to the person I thought your mom was. I finally said. But I don't miss living a lie. She nodded like that made perfect sense, which it probably did to someone who's 8 years old and hasn't yet learned to complicate simple truths. Out of the mouths of babes.